President Trump is trying to change the political landscape of Middle East, and that's what his desert diplomacy is all about. And while many feel his first trip overseas is heavy on optics, there could be some substantial movement on geopolitics as well. Well, for starters, he has begun normalization with Syria. After a quarter of a century, Syrian President al-Sharaa, who went by the name Abu Muhammad al-Julani as a globally designated and a US designated terrorist, is suddenly now in Trump's good books. And American sanctions are likely to be lifted, and along with that, EU sanctions will also go away. But as Trump dangles this carrot, he wants to have some big gains, from Turkey to Russia to Syria, of course. And let's put that out as big questions that we are asking. But first up, I want to play out this soundbite of Donald Trump as he hopes to make those big gains in Syria.
I will be ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria in order to give them a chance at greatness. Now it's their time to shine. It's their time to shine. We're taking them all off, and good luck, Syria. Show us something very special like they've done, frankly, in Saudi Arabia. Okay, they're going to show us something special.
The big questions that we are asking, is this really a big step towards normalization with Syria? The fact that sanctions have been lifted, EU sanctions would also, of course, as I said, go away, and that will ensure that the financial helplines will start. The second big question that we are asking, will Syria now actually join the Abraham Accords? Let's not forget, a lot of this has been tied to US's policy with regard to Israel. Trump may not be stopping over at Tel Aviv, but Israel is a very large part of the entire trip. And third question that we are asking is, what does Trump's Gulf diplomacy really hope to achieve? The big takeaways in terms of behind the optics, behind the red carpet and the big fancy jumbo jet, what really is it hoping to achieve? Daniel Brock, who's a senior journalist, joining me from Washington. Anjana Sankar, who's a senior journalist, is joining me from Abu Dhabi. Daniel, let me start with you. The fact that there is now normalization of ties between Syria and US would probably be unthinkable just a few months back. How do you see this, and what, according to you, Trump is really hoping to achieve by opening the financial taps once again for Syria?
Well, I think a couple things are possible. I'd start by saying that ties are not normalized yet. He hasn't talked about restarting formal diplomatic relations, and he's just promised to remove sanctions. And as we know, Trump can change his mind often. So we're waiting to see exactly what's going to follow. But I think that the main thing he's trying to achieve...
Daniel, a lot of people are expecting that lifting of sanctions will probably be starting of the process towards normalization. But go ahead, make your point.
True.
Yeah, go ahead, make your point.
Yeah, that's true. It could start that process, certainly. I think the main thing he's after, per what you were saying earlier, is to try and get Syria into the Abraham Accords. So he's talked a lot about trying to get Syria to recognize Israel, to partner with Israel. And I think he hopes that by meeting with Syria's new president, he can kickstart that process. And removing the sanctions is a show of faith. I think he's also hoping just in general for a more stable Middle East. And he's hoping that his kind of personalistic approach to diplomacy can have that effect everywhere, but including when it comes to Syria.
In fact, Anjana, you want to come in there in terms of Trump's desert diplomacy? There is a lot really on the platter. And how much do you think he would really be able to achieve? And what would be the big things that he would like to focus on?
See, definitely when it comes to Syria, I would like to mention that Syria has, a country that has been in a civil war, rattled by a civil war for more than 13 years. This lifting of sanctions means this is a completely new chapter opening for Syria. This is a, renaissance in a way for Syria, because there are like hundreds and thousands of Syrians who are ready to come back. They have started already that journey back home. And this would mean that the very essential infrastructure, the revival of the economy would all start. This is a starting point for Syria. So I think this is a big step for the country, and that is why we are seeing all these big celebrations on the street in Syria. And for Trump, I think this whole foreign trip, starting with Saudi Arabia, as he has done in his first term also, he started with Saudi Arabia. I think this is a clear showcasing of Trump's art of the deal. That's what he wants to do. And I think Trump has done a huge, gamble with this tariff war that he had started with countries like China. So it is essential for him to get these big investments.
Anjana, make no mistake, this is also a gamble. I mean, nobody is saying that this is a win right now. This is a gamble. Make no mistake, the man that he's trying to now, of course, he hasn't normalized, but the man he is now throwing this big carrot to is and was a globally designated terrorist not so long back. So this is not just about Syria. There is, of course, a lot of moving parts to this. But Daniel, in terms of the US-Saudi Arabia relationship and the US-UAE and Qatar relationships, of course, the other factor that's really likely to weigh heavily is the Israel factor, isn't it?
Definitely. Trump, Israel looms over this entire trip, right? Even if he doesn't actually go to Israel, the Israeli-Palestinian fighting,
absolutely,
Israel's war in Gaza is the main thing happening in the Middle East right now. It is the main source of instability in the area right now. And so it's absolutely going to be on everybody's mind. Now, we know Trump wants to bring some sort of end to the fighting. It's a part of, as we've been talking about, the art of the deal. We also know that he wants to expand the Abraham Accords to include Saudi Arabia in particular. That's kind of the big prize on the board. And so I imagine he sees this trip in some ways as an opportunity to hopefully move the ball forward in some way on that in order to try and get Saudi Arabia closer to normalizing ties with Israel. Now, whether that will succeed or not, we don't know, because I don't see anything in this trip agenda that's going to get Israel to withdraw from Gaza as Israel looks more and more set to actually colonize Gaza and go in and begin to set up settlements. Of course, we don't know what's going to happen in Gaza yet. That's all, just kind of conjecture. We're still uncertain what's going to happen there next. But I do think that that's a huge item right now. That's a huge thing that Trump is thinking about.
Indeed, he may not be, as I said, stopping over at Tel Aviv. But that is likely to be a huge part of this entire exercise, which brings me to ask the one final question to both of you. A lot of people feel this is essentially a business trip with, maybe diplomacy thrown around a little bit for the correct optics. Is that how both of you see this, or do you expect big geopolitical wins for Donald Trump from this? Anjana, you go first.
This is definitely, as I said, the optics is very clear. I believe that this trade is definitely on top of his agenda because there is turmoil back home. There is economic turmoil. So he needs to bail that out. He needs big investments for his country. And he is looking at his biggest partners in the Middle East region, like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. So I would think that is definitely top. But, being the US president and as all the regional conflicts that we see here, Donald Trump has not been successful in finding a peaceful solution for the war that's happening in Gaza.
What he wanted to end in 24 hours, yes.
Yes, and he also said the same thing about Ukraine and Russia. That hasn't happened. And we also saw the statement that Donald Trump made regarding the India-Pakistan escalation that we saw, for taking total credit for mediating and ending a nuclear war, a prospect of a nuclear war, as he mentioned. So I think diplomacy, I don't think Donald Trump is going to differentiate between or draw a clear line between diplomacy and trade there. Because he needs to see results in the Middle East.
Very quickly, Daniel, how do you see this? Business with a little bit of diplomacy thrown in between?
First, I just want to quickly correct something I said earlier, which is that we haven't seen evidence that Netanyahu himself has plans to go in and put in settlements in Gaza. Some of his allies are talking about it, but I wouldn't actually bet on that happening right now. So I want to retract that. In terms of this being a business trip, I mean, we've all seen the gift that the Qataris gave to Trump, right? The large Boeing 747, the plane. We know he has many real estate interests in this region. We know that he loves the pomp and circumstance, and certainly the Gulf leaders are more than capable of rolling out that literal red carpet for him. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if
Okay.
shortly after this trip, we see announcements of more business deals involving Trump.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me on Trump's desert diplomacy, and it's still early to decide whether it's a win or not. Well, viewers, as we decode Trump's desert diplomacy, make no mistake, Donald Trump has also legitimized extremism. It's not clear if this unusual step of him ensuring that all Syrian sanctions are removed will actually bring peace. But one thing is certain, this is central to American interests in the region. To get Turkey to recognize the sovereignty of Syria, that will ensure that Ankara doesn't continue to play a major role in Syria and the Middle East. It will also ensure that the last of the Russian presence in the region gets a major hit. And it is also going to ensure that versions of Abraham Accords may be signed between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and even others as well, maybe get finalized. In return, if Trump gets more of those MOUs and business possibilities from his Arab friends, his domestic audiences will validate some of these controversial moves, and that is what is going to matter the most to Donald Trump.